Susan Muto, the co-founder and executive director of the Epiphany Association, spent 40 years working with Father Adrian van Kaam. During those 4 decades, she progressed from a journalism major to a leading proponent of the literature of spirituality. The lessons she took from Father van Kaam transformed her life, just as they have transformed the many people who have taken the journey of spiritual formation. Her first renunciation came in October of 1966 when Muto met Father van Kaam.
Coming as I did out of a combination of journalism and English literature, I said to myself often enough, I'm happy that God gave me gifts for speaking and writing. Actually, my training in journalism was editorial, but it was also for television, radio, and public relations. Then came the commitment to let all of that go and to turn my attention to my work with Father Adrian in those early years after 1966, for which I am very grateful to him. I didn't know the story of relinquishment then as I do now.
That decision to let go of a career in journalism was the beginning of Susan Muto's lifelong journey toward relinquishment.
And then I think in my own story there are embedded other stories of relinquishment, including the relinquishment of Duquesne itself, in order for both of us to go on to Epiphany. Without this letting go, we could not have learned what St. John of the Cross tells us, namely, that the only legitimate key to liberation is renunciation. I learned that very early from Father Adrian. You do not experience freedom if you do not at the same time allow yourself to be separated from what gives you a certain feeling of security and comfort.
Father van Kaam's encouragement of 2 different levels was very important to Susan Muto's future life.
One level that I have to say meant more to me than words can find was his blessing of what I knew was a choice, but one for which I had very little support and encouragement. That was the life and the vocation of being a single person in the world. It was a very difficult question in my mind because coming from an Italian-American family, it was assumed that one would marry and have children.
Father van Kaam taught Muto that there was a valid vocation in being a single person. She found herself running out of excuses of why she shouldn't be happy with being single, and that decision helped shape her life. She started editing a journal of psychology for van Kaam while working on a master's degree in English literature at the University of Pittsburgh, but she was adamant about not wanting to spend her life in a classroom.
He was thrilled that I was accomplishing my Master's of Art in English Literature at the University of Pittsburgh, and then he said, well, now it's time for you to start teaching. I've never had any feeling or done any thinking about teaching, I answered him. Then I said, listen, I will edit your journals, I will wash your shirts, but I am not going to teach. Once again, I tried to stress never having had the sense of being a teacher.
Even as Muto thought she could not teach, ironically, in 1986, she received the university-wide Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching. And what she ultimately found fascinating was the literature of spirituality. That was when Father Adrian suggested a direction at another level in Susan Muto's life.
After the PhD program in English Literature at Pitt, he and I chatted a bit, and I said, well, there are a lot of directions I could take. And then he said, who did you most love when you were studying literature at the master's level? What writer really made you happy? I said, well, the poet that made me happiest was T.S. Eliot. And I said, I really learned so much from the flow of his work, from poems like The Wasteland and The Hollow Men, to his post-conversion poetry like Ash Wednesday and choruses from The Rock, all culminating in the 4 quartets. He said, well, maybe you have your answer there. Why don't you take on writers from the post-Reformation period?
Muto's love for the literature of spiritual writers led her to write a dissertation on the symbolism of evil in Milton's Paradise Lost. It also drew her to ask the formative question, what brings people to God?
At any rate, when I finally got over the petrification I felt about going into the classroom, I gave that one up and started teaching. Somehow the idea came to me that we had to find a way of accessing the 2,000-year treasury of the literature of spirituality.
Muto developed a 3-year course of study in ancient, medieval, and modern authors that constituted a major part of the 6th-semester master's program at Duquesne's Institute of Formative Spirituality. The course ranged from the Desert Fathers to the medieval Cistercians to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It turned out to be a profoundly important basis for her work with Father van Kaam on the first 4 volumes on formation theology, published under the auspices of the Epiphany Association.
The literature of spirituality was an integral part of our work at Duquesne and remains to this day an essential part of our work in the Epiphany Academy.
The truth and wisdom found in her approach to the art and discipline of formative reading of the Masters led directly to the Epiphany Association's commitment to always ongoing, in-depth spiritual formation.
If you don't build your house on these solid blocks, it will fall apart.